Welcome everybody to Energize Wayland's second virtual Zoom meeting. I think our first one was on composting, Cat, and this is our second one in our Zoom-centric COVID environment. My name is Ellen Tone, and I am one of the folks helping to coordinate Energize Wayland, along with my colleagues Kat and Steve, who you see on the screen here. So for those of you, I think most of you probably heard about this, I think through our newsletter or through PEST, as I can see Deborah shaking her head, yes, maybe. Curious if people heard it through their newsletter or your members, or you got it through an email from a friend. So however you got here, we're delighted that you're here. And we're going to spend all of the time talking. Our agenda has 3 items. One, I'm going to give you a minute and a half about Energize Wayland. Then I'm going to hand it over to my much more knowledgeable colleague, Steve Bright, who is our heat pump coach in Wayland, who will teach us about heat pumps and be open to answering any question you have. So if you have a question, you can just, since we're a small group, only 12, just ask the question, or if it's a kind of a bigger, broader question, put it in the chat, which you can see at the bottom of your screen under the word chat, or some people might see it under more ... And then after Steve talks for about 10 or 15 minutes, then we'll hear from people who installed heat pumps in Wayland and in Concord using different technologies, and why they did it, who they used, what their experiences have been like, so we can have some short real life examples in Wayland. So my brief introduction to Energize Wayland is we are a community-based volunteer group that has a goal of having half of all households in Wayland take some action to mitigate climate risk. We want to be the first community in America who can boldly say that that has happened and be able to prove it. So that's about a little more than 2,000 households, 2,400, 2,200 households. We're at about 400 right now. And so if you haven't been to our site, energizewayland.org, please go to it. Let us know what you've done for actions. And our goal is to get more people to do stuff and to understand what we're all doing and learn in the process, so that we can do things that are really impactful. And feel free to put in the chat any questions about the organization. Kat and I will be happy to follow up. So with that, and we have a lot of fun. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Steve.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. Welcome everybody. I'm glad to have everybody here. I'm going to give a short presentation. So let me share my screen. All right. So I'm part of Energize Wayland, as Ellen said, but I'm also part of a new organization called Heat Smart Alliance. Wayland hasn't had a Heat Smart program yet, but there have been Heat Smart programs sponsored by Mass Clean Energy Center in a number of surrounding towns, including Concord, Hudson, Belmont, and Arlington, Winchester. And we may be applying for a Heat Smart grant for Wayland, possibly in conjunction with NATIC next fall, if the program is still running. In any case, it's typically a 1-year program, and when they finish, there's really no follow-on work. And heat pumps, as you'll hear, are something that we have to keep publicizing, because it's not every day that somebody wakes up and says, I need to replace my heating or cooling system. So home heating matters. On a New England level, about 30% of total energy use is residential use. And if you look at that residential use, about 60% is for heating and cooling. There's 17% or so on average for hot water, a couple percent for clothes dryers, and the rest, the lighting and other needs. Running your TV and computers is actually only a smaller piece of it, 20%. Not that that's not significant. And the notable thing here is that so if you total that all up, about 80% of the load has to do with heating heating air or water, and that is all amenable to heat pump technology can be handled by heat pumps. So that's when we talk about green heating and cooling, we're mostly talking about getting people to adopt heat pumps. So a heat pump is something that pumps heat from a cooler place to a warmer place. And you're already familiar with this technology. A refrigerator is a heat pump, a dehumidifier, an air conditioner. These are all actually heat pumps. They do what's described in the first line there. And nowadays they're available for home heating and cooling, for water heating, and even clothes drying. You can buy now heat pump water dryers that are considerably more efficient than conventional electric resistance clothes dryers. So the basic, and this is about as technical as I'll get here, the basic idea is you put in a unit of energy into a heat pump, 1 unit of electrical energy. You take heat energy from the outdoors, and this is what's known as an air source heat pump. And roughly you can take about 2 units of heat energy from outdoors and end up with, the math is about 3 units of energy in the home. Now this is very rough, crude explanation. You can also take heat energy out of the ground. That's known as a ground source heat pump. And in that case, you can get as much as 5 or 6 units of heat energy into the home. So that is more efficient, but it's also more complex and costly. Heat pumps are really a key part of the overall strategy to decarbonizing our whole lifestyle. And part of that is decarbonizing the grid through renewable energy with wind and solar, hydro, and these days even keeping nuclear plants running because they don't emit carbon, at least maybe not building new plants, but keeping the ones that are there running, and biofuels and so forth. So decarbonizing the grid is important. Once you've decarbonized in terms of the residents, what you want to do is weatherize, and we were make the house as efficient as possible with insulation and air sealing, electrify the heating and cooling, and that's through heat pump technology, and that happens, as you'll hear, over time, and shifting to renewable electricity. So those 3 steps are an important part of the overall strategy for Massachusetts and the whole country to decarbonize. Now, because heat pumps, the heating and cooling system in your home is one of the more expensive, complex systems in your home, there are really 3 specific opportunities that I make where it makes sense right now to really consider a heat pump. So the first one is, if your heating system or air conditioning system, if you have one, is aging, and by that I mean 15 years old or more, don't wait till the system fails outright, but consider it's time to start thinking about a heat pump. Now it depends, sometimes these systems will go for 20 to 30 years, but if you've gotten 15 years out of it, you've done pretty well. And so it's reasonable. What you don't want to do is wait till the last minute till it's failed and now it becomes an emergency and you don't have time to really evaluate the choices. The second situation is you've got a home and there are fewer of them, but there are still houses in this area where you have no air conditioning, or perhaps you're depending on wall units or window units for air conditioning. And those units, even the better ones, are quite inefficient compared to modern built-in air conditioning or heat pumps. And when we talk about heat pumps, don't get confused. They provide both heating and very efficient cooling. So the side benefit of when you change your system is that you get heating and cooling. And then the third case is you're building an addition on the house or a new house, and then you should really consider a heat pump as an exclusive heat source, providing all the heating and cooling for that new space. There are good solutions on the market now. So those 3 situations are the cases. we're not saying, it often, if you have a 5-year-old heating system, it probably doesn't make sense to run out and replace it with a heat pump. So I want it to be realistic here. I'm going to address here 2 common situations that I see in my year of coaching neighbors in Wayland and surrounding communities. The first one is your house has existing ductwork. What that means is you have what's called a forced air system. You have a oil, gas, or propane powered furnace in the basement with a fan, and that's blowing air through the ductwork, and that's how your house is heated. In that case, and you may or may not have central air conditioning. If you have central air conditioning, it works by having a coil sitting on top of that forced air furnace that communicates through refrigerant lines with an outside unit that probably looks something like the one on the left here. That's your outdoor condenser. Now, the simple solution is to replace, when you replace your old air conditioner, when it needs replacement, or when your furnace needs replacement, consider replacing that air conditioner with a heat pump. Now, a question for the audience is, does anyone see the difference between these two? The answer is no. From the outside, they look exactly the same. I literally took, this one is literally a picture of a air conditioner from the Carrier website, and I'm not endorsing or recommending Carrier. That's a very good brand, but it just happened I picked that image. And I took an image of a heat pump. They look exactly the same. The difference is really some extra valves in the heat pump and some extra controls. So they're very similar mechanically in all respects. So because they look the same, and they're going to go, if you had an existing air conditioner, the installation cost, or even if you're putting in air conditioning for the first time, the installation cost is going to be, the effort is about the same, so the cost is about the same. The equipment cost for the heat pump is marginally higher, and by that I mean something like 5 to 15%. Now, it may require, depending how old your furnace is, it may require replacing the furnace as well. So that's one, possibly an expense you weren't planning. But again, if the furnace is aging too, it may make sense. With today's energy costs, a dual fuel approach makes sense. That is, you'll use the heat pump down to maybe 30 or 40 degrees, and below that temperature, you'll swap to using the oil and gas or propane system. That'll keep your energy costs about the same, but by doing that, you have the potential to reduce your carbon footprint considerably. And if we get regulations that change the economics of using electricity versus fossil fuels, that you'll be in a good place to take advantage of that. The second situation that's common in this area is your house has baseboards or radiators with steam or hot water in them. And in that case, you have what's called a hydronic heating system. It's powered by oil, gas, or propane. And the usual solution, the best option there, is to put in what's called a ductless mini split heat pump. And those those are quite common, and originally as single zone units. You had one outside unit for one inside unit. And over the last 5 years, the manufacturers have introduced multi-zone systems where you have a single outdoor unit and multiple indoor units connected. And there's quite a bit of flexibility in these systems. There are the typical wall-mounted units that you see here, ceiling cassettes, and floor units. Again, these can be used in conjunction with an existing oil, gas, or propane system, so it's similar to the dual fuel approach, or they can be the exclusive heat source. So those are the two common situations, but believe me, over a year I've seen all sorts of oddball things right here in Wayland and the surrounding communities. So there are people who have a mix of these systems because there was an addition to the house. There are all sorts of oddball situations, and there are solutions. So to keep this brief, there's a ton of information available already. I have a handout that we're going to do a follow-up email to all the participants in the call, and it has links to some great resources from the NEEP, the New England Energy Partnership, from Mass Clean Energy Center, and from Mass Save. So there's a lot of basic information on the web. You do, to take advantage of the Mass Save rebates that are available for heat pumps, you need to have a recent energy audit. And as part of that, you can get some weatherization done at no cost right now. So that's a second step. I'm available as a coach for Wayland residents. And as I said, I've done it for Wayland residents and outside residents to help them through this process. And for everybody, I recommend getting at least 3 quotes from heating, cooling installers. Every home is unique, and I've found that different installers have different ideas on how to, what solution is best for the home. So it's interesting to get those opinions. And the range of equipment and costs that you'll see is quite large. And so this helps you sort it out. And again, I'm available to help you review proposals, understand them, and suggest follow-up questions to the installers. So we are going to have time for a Q&A, but I want to now give a chance to 3 of our neighbors to talk about their systems, and we'll start with Tony Lee. So Tony, we'll make you the speaker now.
Steve, can I ask you to stop sharing your screen and we can?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, I guess I'm unmuted and I can talk. Everybody can hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm married to Margie Lee, and we live at 14 Brooks Road, which is down behind Nell's Restaurant. And we're in a colonial with about 1,800 square feet, built in the early 1950s. And we had a oil furnace with ducts distribution. And we were looking, our motivation was to reduce our carbon footprint. We participated in the 2012 solar program, and that was such a success financially and otherwise. And we got all our money back and then some, and we are generating 10% more electricity from our solar panels than we're using, and that includes a plug-in Prius. So that was a go. And so when we heard about the heat pump option, we jumped at it as an additional opportunity. And in the solar program, we had, great success with the town-wide effort, the organizers and the coaches and stuff like that. So we immediately glommed on to, drum roll please, Steve Bright as our coach, and did a terrific job. He understands the language. The heat pumps are far more complicated than the solar ever was. We seriously considered a ground-sourced heat pump, and I'd say we were just inches away from making that decision. And I mean, it's more costly, and we figured that we would contribute the money we had made through the solar panels to that effort, But it was so disruptive. Our backyard is covered with a septic system, so we would have had to drill down 160 feet, and that just involved a lot of trees that would have to be removed and stuff like that. So we went with the air-sourced heat system, and we got, as Steve recommended, we got 3 or 4 quotes from different kinds of operations, and that was really well worthwhile. I think one person came in just much too high. Another person came in and wanted to redo the whole duct system in the house, which involves pulling out the sheetrock and getting behind the walls and stuff like that. And in the end, we went with Rodenheiser, a little bit more expensive, but they were more professional and did a great job. They ran through, the rebates that we had to file for. They took care of it. They were really excellent. So we installed it in October of last year. So we've had it for about 8 months. One thing that I didn't mention is that we did not have coolant in the house. We would gut it out for about 10 days or 2 weeks every summer, and with fans. We actually bought a wall unit to stick in the window, a window unit to stick in the upstairs bedroom window about 6 years ago. We had it up there for 1 year, and it never came out of the basement again. So we're a little bit unique in that situation, but we thought the summers are getting warmer, it's getting more uncomfortable, and we really do need the coolant. So our system cost about $22,000, but we got $3,300 back in rebates. So the net was about $18,700. And Steve was he's been managing the dollars or the numbers. I don't know if you want to talk now, Steve, or later. That's about all I have.
Yeah, I wasn't planning to get into the details, but it looked like Tony and Margie saved on their energy costs. They saved about somewhere in the range of 10 to 25%. And the reason I have to qualify it is that the installer identified some issues with the ducting in their basement that and fixed those that could have caused heat loss to the basement. So I can't be sure exactly how much of the cost reduction was due to efficiency improvements versus switching to the heat pump. But again, and it was based on that comparison is based on the electricity and oil costs last winter. And of course, oil has gotten cheaper in the last few months. So this goes up and down, but actually my recollection, Tony, was that your system was around 16,000, and then the rebates took that down to about 13,000, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I just checked the numbers today.
Yeah. Oh, okay. They were,
yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Tony. Shall we go on to Ellen? And
yeah, sure. So we live in a 20-year-old house in Wayland. We had a forced hot air system followed by gas, and just sort of getting to the end of its useful life. And we really wanted to reduce our carbon footprint. We already have solar. We've insulated a ton. We've done, we have a hybrid and electric cars. We've sort of done a lot of stuff. So it seemed like thing to do. And I was going to replace it actually with another more efficient gas system. And then my friend Brad said, "You're an idiot. You should consider a dual fuel. Why aren't you thinking about a heat pump?" So I had already gotten 3 quotes on the gas system. And I was like, I'm already so far down this road. Fine. I'll go get some quotes on these dual fuel, partial heat pump, but keep my gas for the coldest of days. Kind of, I'm not sure I'm totally sold that a heat pump would do everything. So, we have gas here, but I really want to use as little gas as possible. So we got about 4 other quotes. I'd already done these 3, but I got 4 other quotes. Totally recommended getting multiple quotes. And we had 3 systems, one for the upstairs floor, one for the first floor, and one for the basement, because my parents, we'd had sort of an in-law apartment down there. And as a result of these quotes, and they pretty much, they varied by, for the whole house, they varied by like 4 or 5K. Like it was pretty big variation. We ended up going with a dual fuel system with a heat pump, a Bryant system. And we also ended up going with Rodenheiser, but we got some great advice from another guy we didn't end up going with. And we combined our first floor and basement systems into one. So we got rid of one whole system. So our total cost for the 2 systems were around $36,000. We got $5,000 in change in rebates. So sort of netted out to about $30,000 for the 2 systems. Here's what I love about the Bryant system. The controls are incredible. Like the thing on my wall is super easy to understand. I can program it. I can put it on vacation. The app on my phone looks just like the thing on my wall. Super easy. And I think from a comfort standpoint, I noticed that the gas system, even though we had variable speed, the gas system used to come on and then go off, come on and off. These new systems sort of modulate up and down. So just maintains more consistent temperature. The cooling has been good so far. We've had one problem with the installation, I will say, which they've addressed. They've been great in responding to it because they installed it during a 3-foot snowstorm, so it was a tricky installation. And I think because gas is so cheap, Steve and I looked at the numbers. I anticipated that we were going to spend about another $150 a year on heating costs than we were spending before, between 100 and 200, depending on things. And I think that's about what it's coming out for. And we've set this, as Steve points out, you can make a decision about when you want it to go from heat pump to gas. And we've pushed it to a slightly lower point. We'll run the electricity a little bit more than Steve was noting, and we're willing to take a little bit of a financial penalty on that. But system's functioning great. I got rid of a whole system, which is a sustainability move, and we're really happy with it. It's a 20-year decision. So I think I would have kicked myself if I hadn't gone with a heat pump a few years from now and say, why did I lock myself into gas for another 20, 25 years without some electrical options? And Steve helped us as well. So certainly recommend our free coaching services. So back to Steve.
Yeah, I wanted to make clear that I do all this as a volunteer effort. So, all right, thank you, Ellen. And Kim, let's hear from you. Need to unmute yourself.
Kat, can you unmute him?
I'll unmute you. Unmute. It's not allowing me. That's not good. I thought I had this power.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hey, excellent. Hey, I'm Kim Slack. I live in Concord, in a cape that was built in 1955. We had an old oil baseboard furnace, and many years ago we had an oil spill in our basement. So we did not ever want to experience that again. So we tore out the old oil furnace and installed heat pumps. And so we're heating entirely with heat pumps. And we did this 2 years ago. And a lot of people are skeptical that you can not rely on fossil fuels. I mean, doesn't it go back to when we used to live in caves? I mean, we always thought that we had to burn something to stay warm, but now the technology has changed such that that's no longer true. And so not this winter, past winter, but the winter before, we had probably a week or two where it hovered around zero, maybe in the low single digits. And we had one room here in the basement where I'm at, where it did get cold. We keep the temperature about 68, and this room, because it is uninsulated, got down to like 64 or maybe 63. And so that was the coldest it got. But all the other rooms have been fine, and we've done pretty well. And we wanted to do this partially because, like I said, we didn't want another oil spill, but we also wanted to get rid of fossil fuels, get off of that. And as Ellen said, you know, it's a 20-year decision, so we wanted to just pull the, make the decision and go with it now. I estimate we're saving probably 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions that we had with the old oil furnace, and probably 5% or 10% of the operating costs have been lower. As Steve said, though, the oil prices fluctuate. Right now they're lower, so it may not, the operating costs may not have done well.
Kim, can you just say a bit about the type of system you installed?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So it's a mini split or ductless system. So what that means is that they install, as you saw in that picture with the Steve showed, they install like a big box with fans on the outside. And we have 2 of those. And then they go and connect to, we have 6 what's called air handlers that are connected with pipes to the outside units. And they're...
Point out, we can see the wall unit to the left of your head in the background.
There it is. That's right.
One of the 6 wall units, anyway.
That's right. So I'm in my wife's studio here in the basement. Wall unit's not on right now because it's pretty cool. The process we used for an installer was to get a number of different proposals. And I have to say they varied widely. So I agree with Steve. You want to get at least 3 proposals, and you'll learn a great deal from each one. But they range in price and cost and in customer experience. Some people, believe it or not, wouldn't return phone calls. So it's important that you have that experience because you learn which installers you want to ultimately have service you. Probably the biggest change for us is we used to love, we have a down comforter, and we would set back the temperature at night and crawl under that comforter and be nice and cozy. With a heat pump, you have this idea that you need to set it and forget it because it will take the heat pump a long time to ramp up in the morning, like if you try to set it back. So that means we're keeping the bedroom at probably 65 degrees all day long. And it is actually the most efficient way to run these things. Another kind of paradigm or assumption that has to be broken is this idea you have to dial back. So keeping it at like 65 was good. So we just had to adapt with a light blanket, and that's been fine. And that was probably the most difficult thing to get used to. Our cost was about $22,000, but when we added in all the rebates, it came out to about $13,000. So all the incentives and rebates, and there's a number of them, and so it's useful to have a coach to kind of show you which ones you need to get and which ones you can get if you're aggressive or assertive with your installer to get them to fill out the paperwork. So let me know if you have any questions.
All right, thank you, Kim. So with that, I'd like to open it to questions from our attendees and residents. And
Raise your hand and I'll try to unmute you. Carol, here we go. And again, it's not letting me. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, if you're at a
I got it.
okay,
It
great.
comes up on my screen.
Yep, you're good. You're good, Carol. Or Kat, you could just unmute everybody. It's also okay.
So this is key to me because I've got mass save coming in, and I'd also like to replace the oil furnace. So how hot have you guys been able to keep your house? I say this as somebody who has a mother who's turning 90, whose lament is always, I'm too cold. So I'd like to go with the air sourced heat pump. I just want to make sure that even if I have to go dual fuel, that it will actually keep her warm, because otherwise life will become very miserable. So would you say that you could run it closer to 70 or 72?
Yeah, absolutely. They will put out heat, up to even warmer. The air that's coming out of the vent from the heat pump is probably somewhere around 100 degrees. So, you know, you can get it warmer. Now it might affect, you know, where the swap over temperature is, but if you're replacing the oil furnace, it's a great time to make sure when you replace that oil furnace that you get one that's compatible with efficient heat pumps. The older oil furnaces typically had a single speed fan, and that's not compatible with the heat pumps, which have variable speed motors. So you need to get a heat pump and a furnace that are compatible. So I would definitely, you know, if you know, this is a great time to consider it if you're replacing the furnace.
Carol, you should get Steve to come out to your house, take a look, and he'll help you guide you through this.
Well, that would be good because Mass Save is coming out at some point next week. So
Great.
give me a heat estimate. But do I need, I thought you just set it up with the air sourced heat pump. You didn't actually need a furnace, or is that the whole dual furnace?
That's the dual fuel approach. Yeah, it depends on your, so you have, you're calling it a furnace, so I assume you mean you have ducting, you have air ducting.
Yeah, we have, it's forced air, and we have gas. So we've got like gas water heater, gas stove, and a gas
So
dryer.
it is possible to get rid of the oil furnace and put in what's called an air handler. And I have coached one friend through that process. It's a little trickier because the installers, very few installers are comfortable doing that, but that's certainly a choice. But it is probably going to cost you more to operate that, because as the temperature gets really cold, the electricity needed, you need more electricity to operate the heat pump. So the economics of it are right now are maybe more in favor of doing the dual fuel approach.
Okay, thank you.
You can, we'll send out email on how you reach Steve. So Carol, do you live in Wayland?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so have Steve come take a look, and hopefully with your Mass Save, you should also just make sure you've got an audit, because right now they're reimbursing 100% of installation costs. So if you need any
You
insulation,
guys sent me the note, so I signed up. So I'm getting that 100% installation cost covered.
Great. I would just say I have an 85-year-old mom, and you can run the heat pump plenty warm. The difference is it used to be like really like the furnace wasn't on, then it come on and you feel all this hot air. The heat pumps are more like what Kim says, set it and forget it. You just get a pretty consistent temperature, and it actually is pretty comfortable. So, you know, when my mom's here, I raise it to 74, and then she doesn't complain that she needs to be wearing, you know, fleece in addition to the sweater she's wearing and the wool socks I gave her, you know. So it can be warm enough, and then, you know, because we have dual fuel, when it got super cold, mine reverts to using gas. So I can't speak to how well the heat pump, you know, would have done at 0 degrees. We got one that could go down that low, but it's been no problem keeping her warm enough, particularly, you know, if you've also worked on the insulation side of things.
Okay. Well, then I'll have to get Steve's number.
I see a question in the chat about from Nishith about what brands do we recommend. I really try to be neutral about the brands because you know, all the brands that you listed there are good brands, and it may depend. For example, I coached somebody who already had a very high quality Trane gas furnace, so because of the integration considerations, I said you should really only look at Trane heat pumps, because I think the integration will work best with the same brand. Not always true, but with these higher end furnaces, the controls are really, you have to stay within a brand. And so it depends, but all the, you know, Fujitsu, Mitsubishi, they're all good brands. And I've learned, you know, there's some differences in the performance claims from these different manufacturers, but it's sort of like computers that tell you the processor is a certain speed. These are, I think, to some extent, ideal numbers, so they won't in real life often achieve the numbers that are put out there. But nonetheless, you can get good performance out of all these brands. More questions?
Check the chat, Steve. There's one for Kim there. Or
Okay.
Kim, you can look at the chat and it's,
Oh, okay.
you see it? It's about the cost. It was for 6. You had, well, you can answer the question.
Yeah. So looks like that total cost, the 22,000, was for everything. The 2 outdoor units and the 6 things like the one behind me. So, and they bring in the insulated copper pipe to get into all those. So it's all the labor involved as well.
Kat?
I have a question. So I heard that if you have, you were saying that there's not much of a difference technologically between the cooling system outside and the heat pump system outside. So I had a question from a neighbor who has an old AC system with that thing sitting outside, and she was wondering if she can just have that something changed in it instead of replacing the whole thing.
No.
No? Okay. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Again, the older systems might be using an older refrigerant that they legally can't service anymore. But in any case, it's not possible to, it wouldn't be a good idea to take a 15-year-old air conditioner and try to.
It's pretty new. She installed.
Oh, I see.
So that's why she was thinking.
Yeah. No, I think the cost of doing that would be prohibitive, and the chances of getting it right are probably pretty low.
Could I ask a question of our audience? I'm curious, what obstacles do you perceive in your pursuing this kind of heating technology?
Or maybe the question is sort of like, what's standing in the way? What's feeling hard about this?
Yes.
Yeah, hey, this is Gottfried here. Maybe I can address that and ask a question myself at the same time. Thank you for doing this, by the way. This is helpful. So my question was, and that's also sort of the obstacle, I have sort of a combination of a radiant heating system and baseboard. So I really like the radiant heat. So I'd like to keep that as much as I can because it gives a very sort of nice feel in the room, but it's oil fuel that heats that. So how complicated it is to have a sort of a mix of systems in a way that I guess I could have the radiant kick in at a certain temperature, but I combine that. So that's one obstacle. The other obstacle is just from what I've experienced at other houses from furnace, like duct kind of systems, I don't like the dry air that it generates. So I kind of like, again, the radiant heat or even the baseboard. In some rooms, I have baseboard, which sort of gives, so I guess, doesn't blow warm air around. So
Yeah,
those would be sort of two obstacles.
So the heat pump puts out much lower temperature air than a gas or oil furnace. They put out air at, I don't know, 120 degrees and up, and that really dries the air. So this winter, I heated most of the winter with my Mitsubishi heat pump system. And it was the first winter where I didn't feel my stuffy, my nose didn't feel stuffy from the dryness and stuff all winter long. I was much more comfortable. Plus we had the we had a baseboard system, so just convection of the air. And I really appreciated that the air was circulating in the room. That also improved the comfort as opposed to just passively passing the hot water baseboards. As far as the integration goes, Mitsubishi, so for your type of situation, this is similar to the baseboard case that I mentioned where a ductless system makes sense. And at least, I'm not sure about the other brands, but like Fujitsu, there's most of the but I know that Mitsubishi has a integration system. They call it their Kumo station, which sits, it's a box that sits in my, next to my furnace and communicates wirelessly with the various units that are part of the Mitsubishi system. And that's what, you know, below a certain temperature, it swaps from the Mitsubishi system to my oil system. And that's what controls it. It's basically a way you can use various forms of backup heat. It could be a oil system, could even be an electric heater that comes on as backup heat. That's what it's intended to do. And I think all the, you know, at some point, all the manufacturers will support that type of integration.
Yeah, I had the same experience as Steve. It actually felt less dry than the radiators that we had before. So again, I think it's partially because of the lower temperatures.
Thank you.
Okay, Lois, you'll have to unmute.
Okay, so it's Lois and Paul. So we're in Concord in a 1950s Cape.
You're actually
Wayland, sorry, I want to be Concord, I think. Get reoriented. Wayland, 1950s Cape oil heat. And we had a mass save audit last fall. And I had never heard of the mini split system, but it was recommended. And the person evaluating us went around and came up with these figures. And so it was really hard to get adjusted to it. And the pictures I saw of the units, I just couldn't picture them in my walls, like in my living room, this metal thing. So I'm wondering how people can stand that, or if there are disguises for it. That's one thing. The other thing, we got an estimate for 2 units, right? For our 9 rooms, because we were trying to really cut down the cost. And it was going to be $12,000. So I thought that was high, but it had been higher, and he brought back all the, you know, the numbers. And it was an expensive kind of unit. It wasn't these brands, but it was supposed to be like a really good unit. And I can't find the paperwork. So we're left with now, it's been on my mind, because we've got lots of window air conditioners and a wood stove. And I've been running the oil heat all winter. So I do want to cut down on the carbon footprint. Paul can deal without putting the furnace on at all. And doing his wood, he's got piles of wood out there. So that's carbon, right? So I think it's time to look at it again, though. Something's appealing, the cooling and the oil. I'd love to get rid of the oil. We don't have a gas line around here.
Okay. Well, I'd be happy to provide some coaching to you and on that area. It certainly, my experience was that I last August, when I had the heat pump running almost the whole month, it was pretty hot last August. My electricity cost was about the same as the previous August, when I just had window air conditioners operating less than half the month. So the electricity, certainly for the cooling side, you would save on electricity cost by using the heat pump instead of these multiple window units, and they'll be a lot quieter. Plus you'll get the beautiful view. I can tell that you have a beautiful view outside your house, and you'll be able to actually see out of the house. So.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I've been watching your backyard there, thinking it would be a great place for a ground-sourced heat system.
Well,
Great. I love the garden.
We're
Yeah.
next to the DPW. We're the abutters.
I know.
I just put in the chat, Steve, your email, your Outlook email.
Right.
Hopefully that was okay. So
Yeah.
people can check in the chat if they want to get Steve's email. I know we'll send it out as a follow-up.
I think we'll do a follow-up email also, right, Kat?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're past our 8:15 target. I'm happy to take further questions if people want to stay online, but if you want to leave the call, you're welcome to do that. I'll stay on for a few more minutes. If there are any more questions. And
So on behalf of the town, thanks to Ellen and Kat and Steve for the effort you do for all of us.
Yes, thank you very much. This
Yeah.
was wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Big help.
Good.